Morning, everyone. Welcome to another Sunday special with Helen and Adam today.
Good
So,
morning.
Morning,
morning.
everyone.
So today we're back after a week break from streaming, and we've got Adam and Helen and Ross and Jay are sitting on the bench and waiting for next week, I guess. They've had some things to attend today, so there's three of us. And
Holy
yeah, I think we've
Trinity.
done it before. There was three of us, and we did pretty well. So I'm expecting equally good performance today.
Yeah, we can do it.
What's you guys been up to over the last week? I think we might start with that and then go into the chat about the kind of today's subject and which is on everyone's mind. But what were you
You
guys
go,
up?
you go, Helen, because your international jet-setting lifestyle is far more exciting than mine. Go on, Russ.
Well, I have been back and forth to Malta. London just gets a bit too much for me sometimes, like the intensity of the energy. Bear in mind, I lived here for like 20 years before I moved to Malta, 22 years actually. And it just gets too much, and there's been loads going on. So I just needed a sun, sea, and sand fix. So I popped back there, but I got back to London
You
last
didn't
night.
fancy Southend, Helen?
Actually, to be fair, the weather's been a cracking here,
Yeah,
hasn't it?
that's it. Yeah, that's it.
I got back last night or yesterday afternoon. It's 22 degrees. Well, it was 27, so not that much warmer in Malta.
Yeah.
So, but the one big regret about that trip was that I missed out on Pip in London and seeing you and Ross and everybody talking. So, how was that on Friday, Adam?
Oh, it was pretty amazing outside the Dickens. I mean, the weather was beautiful.
Yeah.
Afterwards, we carried on networking and whatever other excuses you might want to call it, drinking in the pub, basically. Some of us had the iron will and discipline to leave at 9 p.m. as they promised they would do. Some of us didn't really, and some of us were quite smug yesterday when some of the others of us were feeling a little bit worse for wear. So I'm not the sort of I'm not the sort of person to play on that, Helen, as you know. But it was
I can just see you polishing your halo already, Adam.
Exactly. But Ross was spectacular, as he always is.
Yeah.
And Paul Hemming, who's also been on Rod's Rodcast, gave a great presentation as well, where I learned quite a lot, which is always brilliant. But yeah, Ross was at his best.
Nice. What were the highlights of those presentations? What was Ross?
So Ross was talking about trading through recessions, what happened in 2008, what he's learned since then. So probably that's the one to maybe focus a bit on, because there's some great stuff in there. His number one was you can't eat equity, which resonated with me a lot, because there's a saying in the betting community: you can't eat value. You can make as many good decisions as you like, but if it's paper, there's times in recessions where you need cash, not paper.
Yeah.
And that's what you need to bear in mind. So just thinking along those lines was kind of, that helped to shape what I did in the supplement this week around, trying to get people to look at, because people are panicking. Oh, I can't have, what's the number one phrase I'm seeing at the moment? Cash is trash, probably. And that worries me, because that might encourage people to deploy all of their spare cash and then be overexposed to illiquid assets. Yeah. So I tried to talk about the ratio of cash in the bank or cash equivalents to how much fixed rate debt you've got to how much floating rate debt you've got. And so why that's different for everyone really, but why I think it's a key thing to look at the moment. So I think Helen could probably build on that quite nicely.
I love how interconnected everything is. You start talking about Ross trading free session, and then you went smoothly into what you wrote.
It's I'm a segue specialist, Piotr. Segue specialist.
Very well done. Very well done. I love today's post and the kind of at the end the three scenarios where so one could be or one may not be, but it just kind of gives a really practical experience of like how fixed rates and floating rates and kind of equity can affect someone's position. It's really good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm also getting a bit concerned over the number of people who are kind of thinking that, yes, the rate's going up, but then it's definitely going to come back down. It's the there's a scenario where that happens, don't get me wrong, but the use of the word definitely has got me worried about people's debt attitude exposure at the moment, to be honest with you. So that's another thing I'll leave Helen to build on both of those now, I think.
It's a really important thing, though, isn't it? Like, I've not read the supplement yet. I'm sorry. I'm
Wow.
over.
Wow.
So
live on air, outed.
But that will be my entertainment for the rest of the day. But it's what we talk about with kind of cash flow and managing cash flow as well, isn't it? It's you have to think about that kind of liquidity aspect to businesses and to your kind of own portfolio, and that's kind of a constant juggle. And there's been so many examples, definitely in financial markets, but even in businesses, like you talk about the global financial crisis. Actually, it started out as a liquidity crunch. So that's just a posh word for like cash flow problems. So juggling that whole stuff, and yes, we all know kind of about inflation and what that's doing to the value of money. But exactly that I haven't heard Ross say that before. Actually, you can't eat equity. Sometimes you need that for a rainy day, and if that those rainy day funds aren't kind of readily accessible, then you don't have a rainy day fund.
Well, I think there's a couple of things, isn't there? One, this is one of the reasons why Warren Buffett says high gearing, high liquidity is always important. So if you look at the cash pile that Berkshire Hathaway's been sitting on for years and years, it's over $100 billion, and it's there for a reason. They can, because they're good at what they do, they can accept that kind of drag on their performance.
Yeah.
Because it's 15-20% of their assets under management, I think.
Yeah.
Helen, maybe 15, maybe close to 15.
Yeah.
But it's there for when money's needed, because if you think what a blinder they played in 2008, 2009 and made big money during a time where lots of institutions and people lost big money and whole businesses and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
That's where he's at, and that's why I think he found it. Because we forget, one of the points I made today is we forget there was a recession in 2020, even though it was so incredibly deep. It was the deepest one for 300 plus years. We forget about it because we didn't really see the consequences because of the teat of the government.
Watered down by that. But all those big players do. Like, I don't know the exact kind of numbers or the percentages, but Apple and I assume Amazon, but all those people have a year's operating costs kind of sat there ready. And general advice is 3 months, right? Isn't it, for anybody to help you weather kind of like mini storms and reposition yourself? But for somebody like that, and can you imagine what their operating expenses are, and they have a year? That's also risk management. That's not just kind of cash flow. That's like future proofing your business to some extent, giving yourself that buffer if anything should. And certainly in the Buffett kind of example, it's super clever because he can move when nobody else can.
Yeah. And I also think like having this kind of cash buffer, or like just thinking about what's gonna affect your performance, right? Because on of those storms, they affect your performance, and then if you don't have that basic safety net, then you're not going to be making good decisions probably as well, because you're going to be thinking about the most immediate things instead of like how to come out of something in a certain way. So it's a kind of crucial thing to have that foundation.
It changes your decision-making process, and I'm sure Adam has advised people and kind of some like boards or advisory that I've done in the past before, if they don't have a liquidity pool like that of cash built up in reserves. It just what it does, it gives you breathing space. What that breathing space gives you head space, and then you make better decisions because you're not kind of reacting and fighting fires all the time. You're given, yes, it might take a little while to build up, but that should be to me, that should be a priority, because then you're going to make better decisions kind of going forward.
Quite a big fan of those metaphors, really, like taking things into like those holistic spaces, like the breathing space, the head space, and all this kind of, because like this is exactly the same way of things operate in business. Like you need certain kind of oxygen to operate at your best, and then you need things you can then make like sophisticated decisions and not just fight fires.
Like literally, that's kind of what I did physically this week. I just felt my stress levels were up. London fries my energy and my adrenals a bit anyway, and I'm like, I have to physically remove myself from this, go back, be by the sea for 3 days. I was still working like non-stop the whole time I was there, but it's by the space where I'm breathing in sea air. My energy is much better. I find it much easier to ground over there. I was just like, okay, now I can like think better. My brain works better over there. I make better decisions from a much more, just a bigger picture. It gives me perspective. So however you can get to that situation, that position to be able to make better decisions, do it.
Yeah. So Adam, you covered this thing in your article, like this ratio between like the property you hold and the debt fixed rate ratio and the floating rate ratio, like floating rate debt, basically. Like, could you tell a bit more about this, like how it impacts the way you make decisions in your business right now?
Sure thing. I think first of all, I'd say that the chat there around decision making is really, really good. And when you see, I know Helen puts a lot of time and money into the wellness side of her, and it helps her run her business ultimately, and does that probably better than anyone else that I know, which is something people could really, really learn from. But the chats I've been having over the past few weeks, I've seen a few red flags of concern in a few people that I know well that are sensible long-term investors. But I really want to shape people's thinking around, we understand the good debt, bad debt conversation generally very well as property investors. But we do have to look at the moment around the upside risk of the base rate and understand the difference between fixed debt, which is as good as it's ever been right now because of the inflation situation, if you're holding existing assets, and floating debt, which has upside risk at the moment. And that comes back to what I was saying earlier around people saying, I think the rate will go up and then it will come back down again. And I'm just concerned that it might come up and then top out a bit and then come a little bit back down. But, at some point they're going to try and get base back to 2.5, 3. And don't get me wrong, the path to do that from today is not smooth. And there'll be things that break, and there'll be difficult decisions, and there'll be political meddling, and it'll all change all of that. But do you want 80% of your debt at the moment to be on floating rates? I don't. I definitely don't. And I'm not there anyway. I'm very, very risk averse. So I was only at 20% anyway. But even that 20%, I'm going to be dumping half of it in the next 6 months, I'd imagine, one way or another, because it's not exposure I want or need at the moment. And my pipeline, my window for interest rates, some stuff dropping off in 2027 would work quite well for me to keep it's something I've talked about a bit over the years, having a pipeline of debt that drops off at different times rather than a fixed rate. If you've got a portfolio and you've got a portfolio loan and it's fixed, and £2 million worth of debt drops off on, let's say, the 1st of December 2024, that might not be the best date for that to be happening. You're exposed to the interest rate on that day at that point. And I don't like, that's a very, very classic example of taking a risk that you don't get paid for. And really a risk that you don't even understand And that's why you need to break down where the systemic, systematic, and idiosyncratic risks are in your business. So I know now at this point, Helen can't wait to talk about the R word. And I think risk, liquidity risk is a really good point that you've made, Helen, because there's a real lack of understanding of where liquidity can cause an issue. And you think, what happened in 2020 when there was any liquidity risk? They pumped the money into the system in the form of bounce back loans, apart from anything else. So all these small businesses had liquidity risk because they didn't or couldn't or were too aggressive to keep a year's operating costs in the locker, So the government did the job for them. But it's unlikely they'll do that again if something hits the fan on the basis of a base rate hike cycle, And the likely scenario here is a base rate hiking cycle 75% of the time leads to a recession. We've never done one from the interest rate being as low as it was. So we're in uncharted territory there. You have one little shock, as Helen said, the liquidity traps that started 2008 really rolling. And then the amount of bad debt that was out there because it was underwritten very, very poorly and just given away to the wrong sorts of investments effectively. Anything could happen. Anything really could happen. And I think one thing COVID's taught us is in this environment, things move very quickly, much faster than historically has happened. We've had that. You look at the GDP graph now, we've actually had that V-shaped recovery that they were talking about. And it's taken 2 years, 2 months, of which we spent probably 7 months in some form of lockdown. Is that about something like that?
Yeah.
So, we're there, but we've still got a lot of problems we're holding on to from the back end of the pandemic. So, like I said, I'm risk averse anyway, but it strikes me as not the time to be being particularly aggressive. Look at it that way.
Yep, agree with that.
Yeah, and in terms of what kind of similarities do you see between what happened in 2008 and what might happen right now, or 2006 maybe, I don't know, just before whatever was happening, because when I was that 2008 or 2007 crisis, I was at university and I was studying economics, but to be honest, I wasn't really paying too much attention towards the news and everything else that was happening. And it's that for me, I don't have a personal experience of what was happening, how things were going on. But you guys were in the business and you were doing things. What were your kind of what can you draw? What kind of parallels can you draw between then and now?
Oh, do you want to go first on that one, Helen?
Sure. What kind of parallels? Well, my overriding memory of the beginning of that, I've talked about it before, is being up in Edinburgh, seeing some asset managers up there, and it must have been I think it's probably 2007, because it was when there was the Northern Rock, when there was that whole kind of wobble, or the beginning of that wobble, and seeing people stood outside Northern Rock waiting for it to open to withdraw their money. So, do we think we're going to head back to, to kind of that level of panic? No, you would hope not. And I think there's distinct differences. But that panic comes from not being kind of prepared or not looking forward and not being positioned. So actually it kind of ties back to what we've been talking about already, that actually if you have, kind of the liquidity there, or kind of operating funds in the bank already, then when things start to look dodgy, you don't need to be panicking. And again, we're actually going back to decision making, aren't we? It's not like, oh, panic, oh my God, run down to the bank and withdraw all your cash along with everybody else that's trying to get their money out. It's like, actually, you have more options available to you because you're not making decisions out of kind of desperation. I think I've gone off on a tangent there, but Adam, you might have to drag that one back.
That's very. It's very. I still very much like the point around the decision making and the headspace, because when you run investment companies, you make big decisions that have downsides. And you don't want to make a decision because of a what's in the bank today kind of mentality. Even in a small trading business, so what finishes 90% of them off is cash flow. That's why from day one I tried to build my portfolio around cash flowing, and that meant high yielding assets, which meant going to some locations that if I tried to pitch investment to a REIT or a VC, it's not sexy stuff. Ultimately, it's yielding. They consider it rubbish, really. But ultimately, it's very difficult to go broke, which was the real key that I was going after. But in terms of I think your visual metaphor is visual things are always very powerful. And when I remember seeing those sorts of pictures you're talking about, seeing firsthand on the covers of the newspapers, and if you just look at what the media have done in the past 7 to 10 days around, the Bank of England says there's going to be a recession. Well, they didn't even say that. They said there would be a quarter of negative growth at the end of the year if things go on the path, including the interest rate hiking, that the market is currently predicting. The bank doesn't let the market tell it what to do. And I know from the last 12 months of efforts of what the bank's been saying, they don't want to put the rates up. But the energy, the Russia-Ukraine incursion is a situation outside of their control, and therefore they're having to try and counterbalance it. But they're looking at underlying inflation without shocks. But if you go back to, and to be fair, 08, 09, I was much more heavily entrenched in my sports betting arbitrage syndicate that I was involved in. So I watched a lot of this by just reading the headlines and staying abreast with what was going on and watching the FTSE. I remember the day when it went under 4,000. I didn't have, a huge amount of capital or working capital at the time. But I remember thinking, wow, this would be a great day to pile in to the market. If I was sitting with 100 grand in the bank that was not doing a lot, this would be the day when I'd pile it into the market,
Yeah.
But what you've seen, and Helen's mentioned liquidity a couple of times today, what you've seen, what we saw in 2020 was a gigantic keenness to not see those liquidity gaps open up like they did before. And that's very typical, fixing the roof after it's already leaked, right? But we are in a much stronger banking position than we were in 2007. We're in a much stronger capital requirements position. But that doesn't mean there aren't still the equivalents of some of the subprime CDOs and all the rest of it out there in the markets that people don't understand. The next scandal's always around the corner. So that's really where that upside risk is, because we don't know what we don't know on that front. But we do know that the one thing that might give, and this is why I'm a bit cautious about people saying, well, the interest rates will definitely come back down again. The one thing that I think that would give before that is their plans around quantitative tightening. So the sell-off of the bonds, the government bonds that the Bank of England is holding, that they're talking about doing, and they'll release their plans for that in August, those plans could go in the shredder very quickly, because it's not easy from the bank's perspective to inject another 250 billion. It's a lot harder to get rid of that 250 billion when times are tough. And there's no evidence over the last 10 years that QE has been inflationary, which is what they originally said it would be. It's inflated asset prices, but it hasn't inflated goods and services per se. So we could easily be in a world where actually what happens is the rate hike mentality is maintained, but the quantitative easing side changes first. And that's really, there's a couple of moments in the last 10 years in the US, the taper tantrum of 2013, and also in 2018 when the Fed actually went on a tightening cycle, where what effectively happened is the market sold off, it went down 20%, 15%, and then the Federal Reserve just buckled and said, oh, actually, do you know what, we won't do that, we'll put the rates back down. Now, obviously, the big difference today is how much inflation there is. And that's the prime job of I don't know if you saw, but Andrew Bailey, the governor of the bank, is in the Commons next week to defend himself for one MP saying what is effectively not doing his job. I've seen the bank's response to that in the report this month, and it's pretty good, to be honest. But still, at a really simple level, if your job is to keep inflation at or around 2 and it's 10.5, most people would say that's fair enough to call you out for not doing your job.
Yeah, that's not getting a bonus this year, is it? Well, he will, but if you're any normal person, that would be no.
It's better than anyone, Helen. Of course he will, but he gets paid about 500k, I think, for being the governor, and that's why he was pilloried the other week for telling people not to demand more in terms of wages. But one of the things I mentioned briefly today was looking back to the 70s, because people mention it all the time. So I've quoted some of the inflation figures. We had 83% inflation over 4 years in the 70s. You know, we're nowhere near that sort of quantum. We're closer to probably 25% over 4 years. So still very significant. But when people are quoting, oh, interest rates could go up to this, that, and the other, it's a very different world we live in now. But one of the things that's not out of the question in my eyes, especially because we've got a new divide emerging in the country, and that's between jobs that can work from home and jobs that can't. And I see, you know, a little bit more social disquiet about all of this because of the energy situation and everything else. And one of the possible fallouts of that is industrial action. Because the pay disputes, as we get to a confirmed inflation rate at 9 or 10, if you're a union boss, what are you going to do when you go to the employers? You're asking for 9 or 10, aren't you?
Yep.
Or 11 or 12. And that's not necessarily going to be achievable, but it could create a bit of action in terms of those who, without me being too cynical, have a 6-figure salary for leading a union of workers, which is a bit of a laugh in itself, isn't it, really, to be honest?
I think it's a really interesting point. Perhaps you could just say more on it, Adam, because it's a fine point, but I think it's really worth making the distinction about QE that it hasn't been inflationary per se, but it has caused asset inflation.
Yeah, that's a fair point, Helen. So ultimately, when we talk normally about inflation, we're talking about the price of goods and services. And when we think about it as human beings, we probably think of how much does it cost to fill up the car. At the moment, we're thinking how much does it cost to pay the electric bill.
Yeah.
And to a lesser extent, how much does it cost to buy food in the supermarket? Although Rod put a really good post up a couple of months ago about how disproportionate the price changes are at the bottom end of the spectrum, because all the extra money to deliver food, all the extra money to actually fulfill the logistics side of it, means that the value pasta has gone from 30p to 70p, which obviously is like 233% inflation or whatever. So that's your common or garden economic definition of inflation, whereas asset inflation is defined as what the price of, and usually seen by stocks and shares better than anything else. You could argue a bit of this in property, but, you know, on paper, ultimately the records reflect the 2010s over the whole country was a pretty limp decade for property price rises. You had your Londons and you had your Bristols, but, you know, even London, when you look at the whole decade, it had a lot of time in the sun in the early half of the decade, and then it was very disappointing and flat. in the second half of the decade. There's always outliers, but I think Scotland was up 8% nominal terms over the whole decade. I mean, that's ridiculous when you think about it. Inflation was 33 over the decade or something. So houses became 25% cheaper in real terms. But leaving property aside for 1 second, it's the ability to, as simple as if you apply the capital stack to a company and say, well, look, they've got some debt and they've got some equity, and some of their debt would be short-term funding, and some would be longer term, so like corporate bonds and things like that. What QE meant with artificially low rates was that they could borrow super cheap. And what that does when you've got very cheap debt, just because of the mathematics behind it, is it increases your returns on equity. So as the returns on equity get better and the returns on bonds are squashed by very, very cheap money, then more and more equity gets bought because it's providing the gap between debt and equity returns gets bigger, right? And so that then feeds itself because money flows from debt that's out there because of QE to equity because it's getting an above average return thanks to the situation. So that would be probably how I would frame asset inflation for the purposes of that conversation. And for those who don't, understand the finer points of QE, the central bank buys government bonds, so it effectively prints money. And then when we talk about QT or quantitative tightening, there's really two things to consider. One is the bank letting those bonds mature so that when the expiry date of those bonds come up, they don't buy more bonds. So that's a kind of soft way of doing it. That's the way that we've been doing it for a few months now, but quite a lot of our bond debt to the bank is quite long duration. The other way is we actively start to sell those into the private market. So the bank will sell $9 billion worth a month or something like that. And the bank will do that in a very structured and transparent way, which will mean markets don't get spooked. But it's a big deal because that money is effectively going into the shredder rather than being printed. So there isn't as much easy money out there. The rates go up because the demand for money changes. And that's a classic tightening cycle, which, as I said, historically leads to recession 3 times out of 4. And in fact, my probability-wise is going up every week because the likelihood of a shock on top of that tightening cycle is quite high, in my opinion. So I'm moving more towards, 85% at the moment over the next 12 months. It's not a great number to be at, but I prefer to tell the truth and sugarcoat it ultimately, or the truth as I see it anyway.
So what's the 85% you say again?
Probability of a recession in the next 12 months. Economic recession. But that doesn't necessarily lead to a fall in property prices, especially in times of high inflation. Property tends to do okay in real terms. If we're at 10% inflation and property only goes up 6, then it's lost 4 near enough in real terms. But still making 6 is better than making 0.1 in the bank or 1.5% on a government bond, or maybe losing money in the stock market because these aren't great conditions for equities. And although the FTSE hasn't gone on this massive bull run like the S&P 500 has in the States, still we've got other problems in the machine to work through. Some of the tight labour market here is down to the Brexit situation. We're more exposed to energy price shocks than almost any other major Western developed economy. So that's problematic in itself. We're quite sensitive to these shocks. And some of that's because our energy strategy has been utter pig swill for the last 15 years, unfortunately.
I've got some interesting comments, and including Daniel's. Daniel also didn't quite get the 85%. He thought you said 85% loan to value. He says he nearly gave birth when he heard that.
No. I'm closer to 65. I'm below 65, but still, it's that finer detail of fixed versus floating that I'm focusing on personally at the moment.
Yeah. It's a comment from Aidan as well, from Elion, our Elion chat. He says he's surprised. He was surprised so much to learn that how much of the big airlines they claim to not have months worth of cash flow coverage in 2020.
Yeah, it's a really, really fair point. I'm not sure how much of that was gamesmanship, especially as, you know, we'd had you might remember the year, Helen, I can't off the top of my head, but you remember the Icelandic volcanic clouds and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Obviously, that did a lot of, some airlines got hit really badly by that. So, you know, I'm not aware of the airline industry having a particularly good it's got thin margins, don't get me wrong. I remember reading a while ago, 90% of BA's profit came from the New York to London route. And primarily all that profit is located in business and first class.
Yeah.
And that's a horrible, horrible business model for a business that size.
Yeah, that's oh my God, that's just such exposure. They need some help. Give me a ring at them.
Yeah, put me off BA forever, I think, really. But part of that is you have had in the airline sector a couple of spectacular operators like Ryanair, and I'm not saying Ryanair is a spectacular company. I'm saying they're a spectacular operator. You know, their turnover of planes is second to none. They've just done. They bought their planes BMV. I mean, genius business model, and it makes it very hard because what Ryanair have really embraced is there is a big market of people who will just do the cheapest thing, and they'll accept a shitty customer experience, quite frankly. And the thing is, sometimes because they can bid for the cheapest slots and all the rest of it, it might be that you haven't got a choice. But if we go to Tenerife, which is our favoured destination, if we're going to have a European or slightly extended European holiday, not a particularly long haul flight, we pretty much have to go Ryanair, or we've got to go 80 miles to a different airport to go with Jet2, take an inferior flight time and pay more for it. It's just not ideal, you know. But I'm not so far against Ryanair that I'll spend 5 hours of my life trying to avoid their flights, because I value my time more than I get annoyed at Michael O'Leary when I'm on a Ryanair flight. You know, that's the bottom line.
I am stubborn and pig-headed enough. I've not flown with Ryanair for 13 years since they stranded me and my family in the south of France, and that's why I flew back yesterday, because my only option to fly back today was with Ryanair, and I categorically will not go against that principle. Still,
wow. I didn't know this.
But that more says more about my lack of flexible mindset. There you go.
I think it says more that you look after your mental health better than I look after mine, Helen. That's what it probably says. I'm still hard-headed enough to be like, no, I'm not. No, those 5 hours are more important. No, I'll take it on the chin.
Nice. Well, I keep flying with Ryanair, and to be honest, I mean, I haven't had pretty much any bad experiences with them. It wasn't like amazing customer service and anything else, but usually when I fly even with like TAP or some other airlines, like customer service is like okay. Like I don't see a massive difference, and yeah, for me it's like a matter of choice. Maybe until a moment like they will strand me with friends, family somewhere.
They cancelled the flight. There was no other flight. We were in the arse end of nowhere in the middle of in the south of France. There was no flight for 3 days. We had to. It was like that film, Plane, Train, Automobile. We had to get to Girona to get back. No refund, no apology, no arm. Honestly, it was.
It's funny. The worst.
I've not held it against them, as you can see.
The worst experience I ever had on a plane was actually Lufthansa, because they basically our connecting flight in Frankfurt was cancelled, and we were going to a wedding, so we just couldn't mess around. And there were 3 of us there at the time, and we were told by Lufthansa, yeah, look, you'll get your money back if you do this and this. So we flew to another. We were going to Croatia, and so instead of flying to where we were, I think we were flying to Pisa actually, because we were going to the north of Croatia. We flew to Zagreb and had to get a 3-hour cab, and it took the one of us who is extremely tenacious in these situations 9 months to get what Lufthansa had promised us on the night, and to threaten court and all the rest of it, even though a lot of it's in the EU regulations around. I mean, it was an utter disgrace. So
Yeah.
we were left. The upshot of that was we were left in an air. They'd cancelled our flight on the way. They cancelled our seats on the flight on the way back, and we were flying from a small Croatian airport which only had 10 flights a day. And I just knew when we got there, I thought we're going to have a problem here, and we ended up having to go to Southend instead of Birmingham. So it's 170 miles difference.
Wow.
But we did in the end get them to spring for the cab, the extra they charged us for the seats, the whole lot. But it was horrible. But I think the other thing about planes, as Aidan's brought them up, is they're quite fascinating assets from a capital stack perspective, because a plane looks quite a lot like a big property development in terms of sort of senior debt, stretched senior debt, mezzanine, and equity. And it's really interesting because obviously when I can't remember what the average one costs, but they're like 250 million quid and things like that. It's quite an interesting funding structure. And I would have thought that business model wouldn't leave room for 1 month operating costs when you've got, because they'll have some quite high leverage on a lot of those assets. They're not under leveraged. And of course, as soon as you take a Boeing off the forecourt, it's not worth 250 million anymore.
Yeah.
The depreciation kicks quite quickly. So I'm really surprised to think that anybody could. I don't know if they were saying that because of gamesmanship, as I said, or whether that was actually true.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was gamesmanship. And I mean, there must have been airlines that didn't have that, and lots of airlines lose money every month, especially national airlines, right?
Because they're not. The profit motive isn't as strong at all.
Yeah.
'Cause they're state symbols, of course. Yeah. And they're not run with the brutal efficiency of a private company at the end of the day.
Air Malta being a prime example of that. Till it's tie up with Ryanair, actually. So.
Well, there you go. What do you do? You get a great operator in, don't you? And that's the thing.
Yeah, well, it's it seems like all over the world. Like TAP Portugal was also an example of like a super underperforming airline. The Polish airlines, the Alitalia, that like I think went down It's lots of them. But it is definitely interesting to like kind of see how those airlines operate from the perspective of like financing and making sure things are filled, because basically those. You compare this an airline or a plane to like a development. I would compare it more to like an HMO, right? Because you need to constantly have it filled and pay the bills, and you pay all the bills, right? It's all inclusive rate.
Yeah.
Or SA maybe. Yeah, sure. Very short let stuff. Yeah. Fair point. Yeah.
That's funny games. Good. And what's on the basically agenda for the next few weeks? What do you guys think we could cover in those chats that's going to be different than the sessions and different than?
Well, again, Helen's is going to be much more exciting than mine, so I think she should go first.
Oh my god! Actually, I won't be here next Sunday. Just to let you all know now, because I will be in Jordan. Yay.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
I've wanted to go on this. It's a personal development thing, like amazing, some really cool speakers. Stephen Kotler. Actually, I've got the book here because I'm going to take it for him to sign, which is really naff, and I really normally don't do those things. But he is just so cool. He talks about neuroscience and getting in the flow state. So I'm taking my book for him to sign.
Cool.
But it's run by Mind Valley, called A-Fest. So we have speakers kind of during the day, and then later in the evenings it's like a big like Burning Man like festival. So I've got my 32 kilogram luggage for cases packed, ready to go BA business. I'm doing my little bit for BA there. And and it's going to be absolutely epic. You have to apply to go. And I've written about it recently because I wanted to apply years ago, and I just thought I didn't really have anything to say for myself. And so I wrote a post this week about when do you get to that? What do you have to tell yourself where you get to the point where you're like, actually, no, I am going to put myself forward for this. I am going to apply for, I was relating it to the awards, the Property Investor Awards, the HMO Awards that Adam and I have just been asked to be judges for. And when do you get to that point? And you should, like, I'm trying to say, like, push yourself before you're ready. Don't wait till you're ready to do it. But yeah, going off to that with 350 people.
Wow.
On Tuesday. So yeah, the final round of Property Graduate we filmed down to the last 3 on Monday, and then jump on a plane on Tuesday.
Give us a spoiler, give us a teaser. Come on, Ellen, come on.
I was really delighted again that there's a really good mix of men and women.
Great.
It won't surprise anybody to the second. So we had second round last week, and that's where they get an auction deal, and they have to analyze it and come up and say what they would have paid for that asset. And a lot of really good people struggled because they only get an hour to do it. We lobbied John. We got him an hour and 15 actually this year. Bless them. They got a whole 15 minutes more. But some people really struggled with. And to be honest, I always think like, what God, would I go to pieces if that was me in that situation? And I think when you're like a detail person, I think you can get bogged down in the details. So I might easily have, kind of messed that up. But so some people didn't do as well as I know they're capable of. It is very stressful for them. What I do like to remind them of is that they have an hour to do one deal or look at one deal. We have, it's a bit longer than that, maybe a couple of hours to look at 10 deals. So when they're asking for sympathy and saying how hard it is for an hour, I'm like, yeah, welcome to my world.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I get the occasional phone call where it's like, right, I need to know by the end of the call, are you in or out? 45 seconds of due diligence. That's probably my record, and it's obviously the prices are quite keen in those situations, but still it's not the ideal amount of information you would want to take in. I've made that classic mistake I make with Ross when I let him introduce himself before I do it for myself, where what I'm doing now is going to sound utterly rubbish. I think I should probably just duck out and not say, to be honest with you.
No, share.
Definitely not as good as all of that, but we've only got 6 weeks left, I think it is, to our PIP Live event, which of course Helen is also coming to speak at, which is magnificent. Yes. So we're doing some work on promoting that, talking to people who want to come on the business retreat this year as well, because that's generated quite a lot of interest already, even though we're still 6 months away, or 5 months away, sorry. And also I will be going to Manchester on Friday for our PIP Manchester meeting, which always look forward to. Always good, and it's really gathering some pace up in Manchester. And I know a few people come from quite a way over to Manchester to be there. So always love that one. Not least because together provide breakfast. So as Yacht will attest to, it's not easy to get them to give you anything, but breakfast really is an achievement in itself. So breakfast with no interest.
Amazing.
What about you? What are you up to?
So our things are, we just focus on like doing our usual things. There's a couple of deals we're trying to get over the line for next 2 weeks, basically. One which is the biggest one that we've ever done so far. I mean, so close to $1 million.
Fingers crossed. Yeah. Good luck, mate.
It's a commercial property, but it will be a trade. And then there is just focus on Auction Buyers Club, and lots of things happening within the Auction Buyers Club. So now we're kind of running 2 Auction Buyers Clubs, and one of them got a new person coming in, and this guy has got a plan of, he's joining the Auction Buyers Club to document him buying an auction property over the next 6 months. And then he's going to basically be releasing this like a live kind of thing. So it will be like a real life Homes Under the Hammer situation.
What a great idea!
Yeah.
What platforms is he doing that on, mate? And what's the links to all of that?
Yeah, so it's going to be on his podcast, which is Expats Property something. I have to look it up because it's a new thing. It's like he's just started it, I think, a couple of months ago.
Okay.
And yeah, he's been interviewing a few people, but what he wants to do is kind of document someone living abroad, in this example in Hong Kong, buying a property in the UK using auctions, and yeah, it should be an exciting thing.
Brilliant.
Cool.
Looking forward to hearing more about that. I'm just driving past a petrol station, and diesel, it's not a particularly aggressively positioned one, and diesel's 182, which is the highest I've seen it be. I'm not being smug driving past it in my electric car, but 182. That the trouble is the dollar's so bloody strong at the moment. It's killing us on a number of levels. It really is.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh wow, that's a real life, life version of inflation.
The Sunday
Inflation news.
Yeah. Spot prices from Adam Lawrence. Yeah, no problem. No problem.
Oh, amazing. Cool. Well, there's been there's been a few comments that we went through already, and Andrew Carter saying Solihull is expensive, Adam. So I guess what we're gonna do is we're gonna come back to things next week. So Helen's not gonna be here; she's gonna be in the A-Fest cloud, and hopefully we'll have Jay and Ross back. So there will be 4 of us, and another piece of news as well from Ed: Costco Super Diesel 167.
Good tip,
That's what
Ed.
it's worth.
Thank you.
That's what it's worth paying the membership for, baby. Absolutely. My favourite shop on the planet. Don't get me wrong.
Oh, amazing. Okay, guys. Well, thanks for the chat and keeping this chat alive every Sunday. And thanks everyone for tuning in and posting the comments, and let us know what you'd like us to discuss next week. And I'm sure pretty soon, in 2 weeks' time, Helen is going to come and all glowing and tell about her experience with A-Fest. And in 3 weeks' time, we will do a little live from Malta, right?
Wow. I'll tell you how I'm going to Stoke, and Helen will say how it was in Jordan. There's something fundamentally wrong with this picture, isn't there? I need to sort myself out.
Oh, wait till the FOMO when we do it live from Malta, Adam.
I'm just going to be. I'm washing my hair. Sorry. I'm washing my hair.
Yeah, that's actually even more exciting than A-Fest, that we have a little Malta offsite coming up in a few weeks too.
Amazing.
Nice one. All right, guys. Well, have a good Sunday.
You guys too. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks
for the
everyone.
comments.